if we just talk about Adolf's men, what we have to talk about is what they are doing in reaction to a political system that they don't view as serving them. You cannot compare a group of men who are incarcerated at the highest level of any other group in the world and say then that we're the police. No, no, they are not. Like, how can you say, well, black men is the police? You can't say black people are the police, but you certainly can't say man or woman, but you certainly can't say, looking at the incarceration rate of Adolf's men, that they are the police. They are policed. They are not the police. And you can play with that group because the group has no power.
In the opening clip, we heard a snippet of what Yvette Carnell had to say. And in this video, we're going to be wrestling with a little bit deeper concepts as she spoke about. We're going to be speaking about policing from a governmental standpoint, and policing may be a little bit different than what you may be conceptually thinking about. We're also going to wrestle with the subject of why is a certain portion of the African American community poor? And I believe some of our answers are going to be kind of unique from the rest of what I would define as the so-called Black economics that we may be accustomed to hearing, especially those of us that's of the older persuasion. But then the latter part that we really must wrestle with is, why is African American men looking towards the Republican Party for their policing, for their protection? But it's not just African American men. I believe there's of the African American community is starting to look at the Republican Party as their protector and savior of their bodies, minds, and souls, and future. We need to wrestle with these conversations. So let's get into this video.
Emancipated Studios presents Come and Have a Seat at the Table with Uncle Stu.
Now, I want to put her video in the proper context so that when you go back and you may view her video, and I'll make sure it's in the description below, that you kind of understand some of the language. Now, it is a clip. It's a 30-minute clip from, a larger video she did. But nevertheless, in the clip, she was using these words and these terminologies because, from what I can gather, she was wrestling or arguing about what's now been deemed as the brick lady, the woman that accused African Americans for not protecting her, and it went viral in all sectors: TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. It blasted the whole social media scene. And she tackled this subject in a way that I haven't seen anywhere on YouTube. She didn't attack the woman who made the accusation. She, at least in this clip, she didn't go into her past or anything dealing with her character. She narrative of black men not being protectors of black women, but she used the word policing, and I found that very prolific. She was using the word police in the sense of protecting black women from the elements of what's going on, or protecting them as community. And later on, we're going to talk about this word community. But she elevated the conversation because, at least from the clip, the concept of the why. Why is it? And it's not a manospheric term. She was actually using it as to say a lot of African American women believe that black men don't know what community is. Yet she reversed the argument by saying, well, if black men don't know what community is, then somehow black women don't know what community is. But I don't want to make this a black woman issue. I actually want to make this a larger issue, a black community issue. Do we understand community? Now, She is ADOS. And so we have to understand her political mind, and that's not a negative. So this is not a disregard or disrespect, because we have to recognize that our political discourse comes from a multitudes of intellectually. But she's wrestling with and she's speaking to the larger viewpoint that we on this platform is also speaking to. So that's the backdrop of that piece of the video. And very quickly, if she sees this video, if one of y'all get her this video and I totally got it wrong, she could definitely reach out to me and tell me what I got wrong, and I will definitely redo the video or at least make the proper corrections. But in the wrestling aspect of this, it went in line with something that I have also been dealing with. Now, what we're going to discuss in this part is, as I stated before, why is a section, a group of African Americans poor and staying habitually poor? And many people would give the quick answer: systematic racism. You need to read Dr. Claude Anderson's book. You need to do this. You need to do that. But she touches a subject that, even for me, because I've never been in certain sectors of the African American community, I've never had to go through certain things that certain groups of African American men has had to go through, then I'm not fully aware of certain political issues that affected a certain group of men. And so I want to kind of take a part of her video, what she had to say, and then I want us to come back and we're going to have a further conversation on why is a certain section of the African American community habitually poor. Let's go into part of her video.
How in the world do you nominate Joe Biden to be the Democratic nominee for president, given what he did in terms of mass incarceration and who mass incarceration impacted the most, which was ADOS men, and then say, why are you thinking about voting Republican? You took the man who did the worst to this group of people, and you decided not only we're not going to punish him, but we are going to nominate him, and you doggone well better vote for him.
Now, we're going to talk about a particular issue. And I saw this particular political situation rising up in the 90s. But to give clarity, and this is why I say this is not a blame game, this is politics. You have to look at the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I'm going to focus on the Democratic Party. When it comes to politics, politics is about numbers. It's about who is going to dominate in the numbers. And in the early 90s, African Americans were and still are the diehard Democrats, both men and women. But within the male and female sector of politics, African American women outnumbered African American men. So I just want you to think about this on the voting aspect. Although African American men and African American women are both Democrats, looking at the allegiance of the African American community, number for number, more black women was registered as Democrats versus black men. So in other words, you may have 90 black women that are registered voters versus, say, 50 black men are registered voters. Therefore, as a party, in order to win, they appeal to the larger number of that group. Now, while collectively they need men and women, but they appealed more to African American women. But we have to take a deeper look at, well, if African Americans as a whole are Democrats, then shouldn't African Americans as a whole benefit? No. This situation did not benefit men. In the 90s, when I was growing up, they argued that it was the best economic times for America under, at that time, Bill Clinton. As we will see, it was not true for a certain sector of African American men, and we'll explain why. Let's go back and let's understand why a certain group of black men was not able to vote, nor did they have power, and how did this affect the black community as a whole. Let's get into another part of this video with Miss Yvette. Let's listen.
How in the world do you nominate Joe Biden to be the Democratic nominee for president, given what he did in terms of mass incarceration and who mass incarceration impacted the most, which was ADOS men, and then say, why are you thinking about voting Republican?
Now here, I know a lot of people love the buzzword, or it is an actual word, when we begin to talk about mass incarceration or the 1995 crime bill. But prior to the crime bill, there was two things that took place that many people don't really speak about. One, it was what's known as black flight. What is black flight? Well, we know what white flight is. We define white flight as when a black person moves into a neighborhood and white people begin to sell off their property and leave, usually leaving a vacuum of economics and social resources. However, black flight was something that was happening in the early 90s. But I normally define it as the time of the remigration. Many people from New York, New Jersey, DC, Chicago, little bit of California was all remigrating to the South, and for some, it will be migrating. Now, I define it as the remigration because many of those individuals that was moving South, their parents came from the South, so they was basically going back to where their parents came from. So you had places like Atlanta, Charlotte, areas of the suburbs of DC, certain areas of New York as well. But most of it was moving towards the South, and I call it the Great Remigration. This is important because those that was now leaving the inner city were your doctors, your lawyers, your middle managers. People was leaving because companies was sending them down there. And that's very important because it began to start with the vacuum of your, if you want to call it, middle class African Americans moving into the suburbs. And the suburbs began to have their own ideals of life, their own philosophy of life, and looking at things politically totally different than what the inner city was looking at. It also is going to give you a better understanding that you also can say you had the emergence of two different political ideologies coming out of this emergence. Whether it was intentional or non-intentional, the fact of the matter was people who was moving into the suburbs was looking at things politically different than what people in the inner city was looking at things. But in the midst of these two divisions, you had a pre-crime bill that showed up that is rarely talked about in political discourses. That pre-crime bill is when they criminalized child support. Now, prior to 1991, child support has always been on the books. It has always been around since the 1910s. But this time, they sold something called the criminalization of child support. And the way they sold this bill was they said, we're going after doctors and lawyers and all these high professional people for back child support. And when that bill became, it didn't affect the rich. It affected the poor. And unfortunately, when it affected the poor, it didn't really hit a lot of your lower income men until the 1995 crime bill. I believe that when this particular bill showed up and the way they sold it to America, the African American community of the inner city, and that's a really sharp and sometimes politically incorrect word to say, but give me the latitude. The inner city, urban cities, black cities, was even now being more affected by the criminalization of child support. It meant that if you had to pay child support and you was behind in child support, you could lose your driver's license, you could go to jail, and even though you go to jail, that child support order is still needing to be paid. So if you was in jail for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that bill was going up and up and up. And usually it only takes a week, 2 weeks to be out of work. So now that person that goes to jail because of back child support end up coming out with no job. And now they became a habitual offender of child support. But because many people didn't even understand the full weight of the criminalization of child support, it became an underbelly current of deep poverty for a certain section of the African American community. Another part or another layer of the criminalization of child support is that if a certain section of the black population got on welfare automatically put the male on child support, which meant there wasn't even a choice of whether or not a woman wanted to put the baby's father on child support. It now became in control of the state. And you know, if the state gets involved, that means they're going full out weight to find that baby's father, charge him with crimes of lacking in child support. And none of these things was ever being talked about when it came to the criminalization of child support. The next factor that we have to talk about is the crime bill in and of itself. Now, you had many African Americans who voted for the crime bill. We cannot just keep this in the hands of one person. But Joe Biden did write that crime bill, but it was supported by many people in Congress. And who was these Congress people? Most of the African Americans, civil rights activists, and most of them that was now living in the where? Suburbs. And this is where a serious political divide began. It was the hidden suburbs of African Americans versus the inner city of African Americans. But again, we're sticking with the economics. This is where I would argue a lot of poverty situation started to become, because while men was being stuck in prison, also had at this time a higher population of immigrants coming into the United States. And what was sold was that immigrants comes into the United States, but what a lot of African Americans didn't understand was that immigration affected more of African American economy than what we could even imagine. And again, that's a bigger topic that we definitely can get into in another video. But I wanted to give that summation about understanding that we had the criminalization of child support before we had what we can call the crime bill. In this last part of the video, I'm going to break down, or I'm going to let Ms. Yvette break down just one section of understanding the criminalization of child support. And then we're going to wrap up this video.
With regard to child support, the growing establishment and enforcement of child support orders tends to raise the expected value of the order against non-custodial parents by raising the probability that any such order will have to be paid if one has regular earnings. Furthermore, these orders constitute a large tax on the earnings of the low-income non-custodial fathers. Child support orders for low-income non-custodial fathers are in the range of 20 to 25% of income. When combined with payroll taxes and phase out ranges for food stamps, the marginal tax rates on these men are often high as 60 to 80%. If non-custodial fathers are behind in their child support, states will garnish up to 65% of their take-home pay to cover their child support payments, which is the federal limit on wage garnishment for debt purposes.
Wow. This was one of the reasons why I said I was inspired to do a video series on why you are poor, or why is there a certain section of the African American community poor. My first argument is going to be, is it due to laziness? No. Is it due to inopportunities or places we can't get opportunities? No. It's because there are certain bills that we need to now tackle, and we need to take these real arguments of understanding child support and understanding the criminalization of child support. As you just heard, 65% of a man's income to pay for child support. I'm a single father. I've been a single father. I know what it means to get money. I never took my daughter's mother to court for child support. I raised her. Pat on the back for me. Hoo-hoo. But here's the reality. For many African American men, that's not the case. And if you think about it, for every $100 he makes, $100, $65 of that $100 he doesn't even see if he paid child support. Not only that, so you're telling me that we can live off of $45 for every $100 we make? We can't. And if he doesn't have a job and you can't get child support, you're still stuck. You're still stuck. There's more to this conversation that we're going to have, and I am going to do a part 2 where some of the things I talked about in this video, I'm going to expand on it in the next video in my series, Why Some of Us Are Poor. If you like these videos, leave a comment. Hit the like button for the algorithm. Subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. And if you want a better understanding, or if I said something that you want a better understanding of, leave me a comment below and I'll definitely make a video to express or explain some of the things going on within the community. This is Uncle Stu for Seat at the Table, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. This is Uncle Stu. Peace.